I woke up that Tuesday morning to find a bright orange envelope stuck to my front door, and my stomach dropped because I knew exactly what the color meant: another fine from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. My name is Zachary Harding, and I've owned this 20-acre farm in rural Collin County, Texas, for 15 years. My father bought the land back in the 1980s when this whole area was nothing but fields and livestock operations. I inherited it when he passed, and I'd been running it as a working farm ever since: chickens, a few goats, vegetables, the whole 9 yards. The farm had been here long before any subdivision, any manicured lawns, or any homeowners association with too much time on their hands. I ripped open the envelope right there on my porch, my rooster Hank crowing in the background like he did every morning at sunrise. The letter inside was typed in that overly formal language these HOA people love to use. Dear Mr. Harding, it has come to the attention of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board that excessive noise originating from your property, specifically rooster crowing, has been disturbing the peace and tranquility of our community. As per Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws regarding noise ordinances, you are hereby fined $500. Continued violations will result in additional fines of $1,000 per occurrence. You have 14 days to remedy this situation or face further action. The letter was signed by someone named Brenda Patterson, HOA president. I read it 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. $500 because my rooster crowed. A rooster, on a farm, that had been operating since before half these houses were even built. I walked back into my house and immediately called the number printed at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice artificially sweet. Meadowbrook Hills HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Yeah, this is Zachary Harding. I just got your letter about my rooster. Oh, Mr. Harding, I'm so glad you called. Yes, we've received multiple complaints from residents about the noise. It's simply unacceptable in a residential community. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. Madam, with all due respect, this is a working farm. It's been here for over 40 years. Your subdivision is what's new here. Mr. Harding, when you agreed to be part of the Meadowbrook Hills community, you agreed to abide by our rules and regulations. I never agreed to anything. I'm not part of your HOA. My property was here first. There was a pause. Our records show that your property falls within the boundaries of our jurisdiction. Your records are wrong. This is agricultural land, zoned agricultural, and it's been operating as a farm long before your development broke ground. Well, she said, her voice losing some of its sweetness, that's not what our legal team has determined. The fine stands, Mr. Harding. You have 14 days to pay and address the rooster situation, or will be forced to take further action. Further action? What does that even mean? Legal action, Mr. Harding. We have the authority to place a lien on your property if fines go unpaid. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. My hands were shaking. A lien on my property, over a rooster doing what roosters do. I spent the next hour digging through my filing cabinet until I found my property deed and zoning documents. Everything was clearly marked as agricultural. There was no mention of any HOA, no covenants, no restrictions beyond standard county regulations. I'd never signed anything, never received any HOA documents when I inherited the place. Nothing, with my documents in hand. I drove to the Collin County Planning and Zoning Office in McKinney. The woman at the front desk directed me to a clerk named Michael Stevens, a middle-aged guy with glasses who looked like he'd been working there since the building was built. "What can I help you with today?" he asked. I spread out my documents on his desk. "I need you to tell me if my property is part of an HOA. I've been farming this land for 15 years, and now they're trying to fine me over my rooster." Michael pulled up my address on his computer and started clicking through screens. His eyebrows went up. "Okay, so this is interesting. Your property is zoned AG1, agricultural. According to our records, it's been continuously farmed since 1983. The Meadowbrook Hills Subdivision was approved and built starting in 2019. So I'm not part of their HOA, not according to anything I'm seeing here. Agricultural properties have different zoning and aren't typically subject to HOA regulations unless the owner specifically agrees to it. Did you sign any documents when the subdivision was being developed?" "Never. Nobody even asked me." Michael leaned back in his chair. "Then they don't have jurisdiction over you. The county recognizes your property as a working farm with all the rights that come with that designation." "Can I get that in writing?" "Absolutely. Give me a few minutes." 20 minutes later, I walked out of the county office with an official letter confirming my property's agricultural status and exemption from HOA regulations. I felt vindicated, but I knew this wasn't over. People like Brenda didn't back down easily. I was right. 3 days later, I got another orange envelope. This time the fine was for unsightly agricultural equipment visible from the road. They were talking about my tractor, which I needed to work my land. I called Brenda again. "Mr. Harding, if you would just comply with our reasonable requests. I have a letter from Collin County stating that my property is not subject to your HOA regulations. We have our own legal counsel, Mr. Harding, and they disagree with the county's assessment." "On what grounds?" "Our subdivision development plan included provisions for managing the entire area, including pre-existing properties that fall within our boundaries. You can't just draw a line around someone's property and claim authority over it. That's not how this works." "We'll see about that, Mr. Harding. The fine stands." I contacted a real estate attorney named Robert Chen, whose office was in Plano. I'd found him online, and his reviews suggested he dealt with HOA disputes regularly. Robert reviewed my documents in his office that Friday afternoon. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-30s, but he seemed sharp. "This is pretty straightforward," he said. "You have no contractual relationship with this HOA. You never signed their covenants. Your property predates their existence. They have absolutely no legal authority over you. So what do I do about these fines?" "Ignore them. They're not legally enforceable. However, I should warn you, HOAs can be aggressive even when they are in the wrong. They might try to harass you, report you to the county for false code violations, or even attempt to file a nuisance lawsuit." "Over a rooster." I've seen HOAs do worse over smaller things. The problem is that even though they'll lose, defending yourself costs money and time. It's a tactic they use to wear people down. "So, what do you recommend?" "I'll draft a cease and desist letter to their board and their legal counsel, clearly stating that they have no jurisdiction over your property and that continued harassment will result in legal action. That usually backs them off. And if it doesn't, then we sue them for harassment and seek damages. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." Robert sent the letter the following Monday. For about a week, things were quiet. I started to think maybe they'd actually backed off. Then I came home from the feed store one afternoon to find Brenda Patterson herself standing in my driveway with 2 other women. Brenda was exactly what I'd pictured, mid-50s, blonde hair styled like she'd just left the salon, wearing expensive athleisure wear and oversized sunglasses despite the overcast day. "Mr. Harding, we need to talk," she said as I got out of my truck. "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Mrs. Patterson. My attorney sent you a letter." "Oh, we got that letter. It doesn't change the facts. You live within Meadowbrook Hills boundaries, which means you follow our rules. No, actually, it doesn't mean that at all. This is a working farm on agricultural land. The county confirmed I'm not part of your HOA. One of the women with her, a redhead in her 40s, stepped forward. Your roosters wake up my children every morning at 5 a.m. That's unacceptable. Then maybe you shouldn't have bought a house next to a farm, I said, trying to keep my voice level. The farm should have been gone by now, the third woman chimed in. She looked to be around Brenda's age with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. The developer told us this whole area was going to be residential. The developer lied to you then, because my property was never for sale and never will be. Brenda pulled out her phone. We're documenting everything, Mr. Harding. Every violation, every noise complaint, every eyesore. We will make your life miserable until you comply or sell. Is that a threat? It's a promise. This is a nice, family-friendly community, and we don't want farm animals disturbing our quality of life. You built your houses around a farm. That's not my problem. We'll see, Brenda said. She gestured to the other women, and they walked back to a white Mercedes SUV parked on the road. I called Robert immediately and told him what happened. Document everything, he said. Get a security camera system if you don't have one. Record every interaction with these people. If they're going to harass you, we need evidence. I installed 4 cameras that weekend, one covering my driveway, one on the front of my house, one watching the chicken coops, and one covering my back pasture. The system fed to an app on my phone so I could check footage anytime. Good thing I did, because 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a motion alert at 3 in the morning. I pulled up the camera feed and saw someone in dark clothing walking around my chicken coop. I grabbed my phone and my shotgun. I wasn't going to confront anyone, but I wasn't going unarmed either, and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's trespassing on my property, tampering with my livestock. I gave them my address and stayed on the line. The dispatcher told me deputies were 7 minutes out. I watched through my window as the figure continued moving around the coop. Then they did something that made my blood boil. They opened the gate. My chickens started spilling out into the yard, confused and agitated. Hank the rooster was crowing his head off. By the time I heard sirens approaching, the figure had vanished into the tree line that separated my property from the subdivision. 2 Collin County Sheriff's deputies arrived and took my statement. I showed them the security footage on my phone. Can you identify who that is? The taller deputy asked. Not from this footage. Too dark, and they're wearing a hood. We'll take a copy of the footage. You might want to check if any of your animals are injured or missing. I spent the next hour in the dark with a flashlight, counting chickens and herding them back into the coop. I was missing 3 hens. I found one hiding under my porch, but the other 2 were just gone. The next morning, I reviewed all my camera footage from that night. The person had approached from the subdivision side, cutting through the trees. They'd spent about 10 minutes at the coop before opening the gate and leaving. On the way out, I caught a better angle. The person was wearing what looked like expensive running shoes. Not definitive, but interesting. Robert advised me to file a police report formally documenting the incident and my missing chickens. I did, and the responding deputy told me they'd increase patrols in the area. That Friday, I got another orange envelope. This one claimed I was in violation for failure to maintain property boundaries because some of my chickens had been spotted in the subdivision. The fine was $1,000. I actually laughed. They'd sabotaged my coop, let my chickens out, and then fined me for it. I scanned the letter and texted it to Robert. His response was immediate. This is harassment. I'm filing a complaint with the county and drafting a lawsuit. This ends now. But Brenda wasn't done. The following week, I got a notice from Collin County Code Enforcement saying they'd received complaints about my property and needed to do an inspection. I called the number on the notice. The code enforcement officer, a guy named David Martinez, sounded apologetic. "Mr. Harding, I'll be honest with you, we've been getting flooded with complaints about your property. I have to come out and investigate, but between you and me, this looks like an HOA dispute." "It is. They're harassing me because they don't like having a farm near their subdivision. I'll come by tomorrow morning if that works for you. I'll do my inspection, and if everything's up to code, I'll close out the complaints." David showed up the next day at 9 a.m., clipboard in hand. He spent 2 hours walking my property, checking my chicken coops, my fencing, my equipment storage, everything. When he was done, he sat in his truck filling out paperwork while I waited. "Mr. Harding, your farm is in complete compliance with all county codes for agricultural properties. In fact, it's one of the cleaner operations I've seen. I'm going to document that in my report. Thanks. Can you do me a favor and note who's been filing these complaints? They're coming through the HOA." Multiple reports, all from the same IP address, probably someone filing them repeatedly from the same computer. It's a harassment tactic I've seen before. Is there anything that can be done about that? If they keep filing false complaints, the county can impose penalties on them for wasting our resources. I'll make a note in my report about the pattern. After David left, I felt a little better. At least the county was on my side, even if the HOA wasn't backing down. That afternoon, I was working in my vegetable garden when I heard voices at my property line. I walked over and found Brenda with a surveyor's measuring wheel, walking along the fence. "What are you doing?" I called out. "Making sure you haven't encroached on HOA common areas," Brenda said without looking up. "That's county property along the road, not HOA property, and you're trespassing. I'm on the easement, which is public access." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I'm documenting that you're on my property without permission." The man with the measuring wheel, a nervous-looking guy in his 20s, stopped walking. "Madam," he's right, "we're past the easement." Brenda glared at him, then at me. "Fine, but we're watching you, Mr. Harding, every single day." They left, but I sent the video to Robert anyway. His response: "Discovery is going to be fun. Keep documenting everything." The lawsuit Robert filed was for harassment, trespassing, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were seeking actual damages for the chickens I'd lost, punitive damages for the harassment, and an injunction preventing the HOA from contacting me further. The HOA's attorney, a woman named Patricia Vollmer, filed a response claiming the HOA had legitimate concerns about property values and community standards. She also filed a counterclaim alleging that my farm was a nuisance and seeking to force me to remove all livestock. Robert called me after reviewing their counterclaim. "They're really doubling down. This is either stupidity or desperation. What do you think their end game is? Honestly, they probably thought you'd just pay the fines and get rid of your animals to avoid the hassle. Now that you're fighting back, they're in too deep to back out without looking foolish. People like this hate admitting they're wrong. So what happens now? We go through discovery. We get to request all their documents, meeting minutes, emails, financial records, everything. And I have a feeling we're going to find some interesting things. Discovery took 3 months, and Robert was right, it was revealing. The HOA had discussed my property in at least 15 different board meetings. The minutes showed that Brenda had made it her personal mission to deal with the farm problem. There were emails between board members discussing strategies to force me out, including the exact tactics they'd been using. But the most damning evidence was a contract we found between the HOA and the subdivision developer, Riverside Properties, LLC. The contract included a provision stating that the developer would work to acquire or remove the existing farm property within 5 years of the subdivision's completion. In exchange, the HOA had agreed to specific property management fees that would benefit the developer. "This is fraud," Robert said when he showed me the documents. "The developer sold homes to people claiming the whole area would be residential, knowing full well your property was never for sale. And the HOA entered into an agreement to help push you out, probably with promises from the developer about what would happen to your land. Can we go after the developer too? We can amend our lawsuit to include them. This gets bigger." We amended the complaint to include Riverside Properties and its owner, a man named Jeffrey Blackwell. The new lawsuit alleged fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the Texas Free Enterprise and Antitrust Act. Things escalated quickly after that. I started getting threatening letters from Patricia Vollmer, the HOA's attorney, demanding I drop the lawsuit. When I didn't respond, the HOA tried a new tactic. They filed a complaint with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality claiming my farm was creating water pollution. Another investigator came out, this time from TSEC. Her name was Linda Morrison, and she was thoroughly professional. She tested my water runoff, checked my waste management, and reviewed my farming practices. "Mr. Harding, whoever filed this complaint is wasting everyone's time. Your operation is small-scale and well-managed. There's zero environmental impact here. Can I get that in writing? You'll get an official report clearing you of all allegations. And just so you know, filing false environmental complaints is a serious matter. If you want to pursue charges against whoever filed this, you have grounds." Robert added that to our lawsuit. The court date was set for October, about 8 months after this whole mess started. In the meantime, the harassment continued, but in subtler ways. Cars would drive slowly past my property at odd hours. I'd find trash dumped on my land near the road. Someone kept calling the county about supposed code violations, all of which turned out to be false. I installed more cameras and caught several HOA board members on footage doing drive-bys and taking pictures of my property. Every bit of it went into our evidence file. About a month before trial, Robert called me with news. Riverside Properties wants to settle. They're offering $50,000 and a public statement that your farm was never part of their development plans. What about the HOA? Still fighting. Brenda's convinced they're going to win. Do we take the developer's settlement? I recommend it. It's not about the money, it's about getting them to admit wrongdoing on the record. That admission will help us against the HOA. We accepted the settlement. Riverside Properties issued a statement acknowledging that they had improperly marketed the subdivision, and that my farm was a legally operating agricultural property with full rights under county zoning. Jeffrey Blackwell personally signed the settlement. That left just the HOA. 2 weeks before trial, I was feeding my chickens when I noticed something wrong. 3 of my hens were stumbling around, acting sick. I called my vet immediately. Dr. Sarah Chen came out that afternoon and examined the birds. She took blood samples and checked their feed. "Zachary, I think these birds have been poisoned. I'm seeing symptoms consistent with rodenticide exposure. Someone poisoned my chickens. I can't say for certain until the lab results come back, but that's what this looks like. Have you had any issues with rats or mice that would have led you to put out poison?" "No, nothing like that." The lab results came back 3 days later confirming rat poison. All 3 hens died. I filed another police report, and this time the sheriff's office assigned a detective to my case. Detective James Wheeler was a veteran investigator, probably in his late 50s. He came out to my property and reviewed all my security footage from the week before the poisoning. "Mr. Harding, do you have any footage of someone actually putting poison in the chicken feed?" "No." "Whoever did it must have known where the camera blind spots were. Or they accessed the coop from a direction you're not monitoring. You said the subdivision is on the east side of your property." "Yeah, through those trees. Any cameras pointing that way?" "One, but it doesn't cover the whole tree line." Detective Wheeler walked the property with me, taking notes. "I'm going to be straight with you. Proving who did this is going to be difficult without catching them on camera or finding the poison at someone's house. But given the ongoing dispute with the HOA, I'm going to investigate this as a potential criminal conspiracy." "You think multiple people are involved?" "At minimum, someone's coordinating this harassment campaign. Whether that's criminal conspiracy or just civil harassment depends on what we find." The detective's investigation turned up something unexpected. One of the HOA board members, the red-headed woman who'd confronted me in my driveway, was married to someone who worked at a pest control company. Detective Wheeler got a warrant for their purchase records and found that they'd bought commercial-grade rodenticide 3 days before my chickens were poisoned. Her name was Susan Crawford, and when confronted, she initially denied everything. But when presented with the purchase records and the timeline, she broke down and admitted she'd put poison near my chicken coop because she was desperate for some peace and quiet. She was arrested and charged with animal cruelty and criminal trespass. The charges were third-degree felonies in Texas, carrying potential prison time. The local news picked up the story. HOA board member arrested for poisoning neighbor's chickens ran on several Dallas-Fort Worth news stations. Suddenly, my little property dispute was public. Reporters called me for interviews, but Robert advised me to decline until after the trial. The publicity worked in our favor, though the narrative was clearly that an HOA had gone way too far in harassing a farmer who'd been on his land for decades. Brenda tried to do damage control, giving an interview to a local newspaper claiming Susan had acted alone and that the HOA didn't condone her actions. But Robert had emails showing that Brenda had suggested taking more aggressive action to deal with the farm problem just weeks before the poisoning. The trial finally arrived in late October. Robert had prepared meticulously, and we had bankers' boxes full of evidence: HOA meeting minutes, emails, video footage, police reports, environmental clearances, and county documentation proving my farm's legitimate status. The HOA's attorney, Patricia Vollmer, tried to argue that the HOA had legitimate authority over my property based on the subdivision's development plan. Robert systematically dismantled that argument by showing that I'd never agreed to any HOA covenants, that my property predated the subdivision, and that the county explicitly recognized my agricultural exemption. Then Robert introduced the evidence of harassment: the false fines, the code enforcement complaints, the trespassing, and finally, the poisoning. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found in my favor on all counts and awarded me $85,000 in damages, $20,000 in actual damages, and $65,000 in punitive damages. The judge also issued a permanent injunction barring the HOA from contacting me or taking any action related to my property. But Robert wasn't done. In his closing argument, he'd highlighted evidence suggesting that Brenda had orchestrated much of the harassment campaign and had possibly known about Susan's intentions to poison my chickens. He'd asked the judge to refer the matter for criminal investigation. The judge agreed. 2 weeks after the trial, the Collin County District Attorney's Office announced they were investigating Brenda Patterson and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA Board for conspiracy to commit harassment and potentially conspiracy to commit animal cruelty. The investigation took another 4 months. During that time, Brenda resigned as HOA president, and the entire board was replaced by special election. The new board president, a reasonable guy named Tom Sullivan, reached out to me personally to apologize for what had happened. "Mr. Harding, on behalf of the new board, I want to say we're sorry for everything you went through. That's not who we want to be as a community." "I appreciate that, Tom. I just want to be left alone to run my farm." "You will be. We've amended our bylaws to explicitly exclude pre-existing agricultural properties from any HOA jurisdiction. It should have been that way from the start." In March, the district attorney's office announced charges against Brenda Patterson and Susan Crawford. Susan, who'd already been charged with animal cruelty, now faced additional conspiracy charges. Brenda was charged with conspiracy to commit harassment and conspiracy to commit animal cruelty. The evidence showed that Brenda had known Susan was planning to do something about my chickens and had encouraged her, even though Brenda later claimed she didn't know specifically about the poison plan. Both women eventually took plea deals. Susan pled guilty to animal cruelty and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for my lost chickens. Brenda pled guilty to conspiracy to commit harassment and received 1 year of probation and a $5,000 fine. As part of their probation, both were barred from serving on any HOA board in Texas for 10 years. The civil judgment against the HOA was paid in full by their insurance company, though I heard through the grapevine that their premiums had skyrocketed as a result. The HOA also had to pay their legal fees, which ran well into 6 figures. By the time spring arrived, a full year after this nightmare started, things had finally settled down. My farm was quiet again. Hank still crowed every morning at sunrise, my chickens laid eggs, and my vegetable garden was flourishing. I used some of the settlement money to install a proper fence along the subdivision boundary, not to keep my animals in, but to give both sides clear separation. I also bought 3 new hens to replace the ones I'd lost and named them Justice, Karma, and Peace. Tom Sullivan and I actually became friendly. He'd come by occasionally to buy fresh eggs, and we'd talk about gardening and property management. He told me that the neighborhood had learned a valuable lesson about respecting existing land use and not assuming they could change everything just because they wanted a certain lifestyle. Half the people who bought here did so because they liked the rural character, Tom said one Saturday morning while picking up a dozen eggs. Having a real farm nearby is actually a selling point now. We market it as country living close to the city. That's ironic, considering how this all started. Brenda was never interested in what was good for the community. She just wanted control. That's what happens when you put people in charge who see an HOA as a way to boss around their neighbors, instead of as a way to maintain common areas and handle shared expenses. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. The whole situation had spiraled out of control because one person decided that their vision for the neighborhood was more important than property rights, zoning laws, and basic decency. Brenda had convinced herself and others that I was the problem, when in reality, My farm had been a quiet, productive part of the landscape for decades. The local news ran a follow-up story about the case, framing it as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. I agreed to one interview, and the reporter asked me what I'd learned from the experience. I learned that you have to stand up for your rights, even when it's expensive and exhausting. If I just paid that first fine, it wouldn't have stopped there. They would have kept pushing until they'd driven me off my own land. Sometimes the right thing to do is fight back, even when it seems easier to give in. The story resonated with people. I got emails from all over Texas, and even from other states from people dealing with similar HOA issues. Some were fighting over vegetable gardens, others over solar panels, paint colors, or political signs. The common thread was HOAs that had lost sight of their purpose and had become vehicles for petty tyrants to control their neighbors. I couldn't help everyone who reached out, but I shared Robert's contact information with those who seemed to have legitimate legal claims. He told me he'd gotten a dozen new clients from the publicity. By summer, my farm had become something of a tourist attraction. Not in a bad way. People would drive by slowly, and occasionally someone would stop and ask if they could buy eggs or vegetables. I started keeping a cooler on my porch with produce for sale on the honor system. It was nice to feel like part of a community again, even if that community was broader than just my immediate neighbors. The subdivision itself changed too. The new HOA board focused on actual community improvement. They organized neighborhood cleanups, started a community garden on HOA common land, and hosted family-friendly events. Several residents told me they were embarrassed by what had happened and appreciated that I hadn't held it against the entire neighborhood. One evening in late July, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when a car pulled into my driveway. A woman got out with two young kids. I recognized her as the one who'd complained about Hank waking her children. "Mr. Harding, I'm Jessica Monroe. I owe you an apology." I stood up and walked to the porch railing. "It's been a long year for everyone. I was one of the people who complained about your rooster. I'm sorry. I let Brenda convince me that you were the problem, when really I should have just bought better curtains and gotten my kids some white noise machines. Your farm isn't doing anything wrong." "I appreciate you saying that." She gestured to her kids, a boy and girl who looked about 7 and 5. "Actually, we were wondering if you'd be willing to show us around your farm. My kids have never seen real chickens up close, and we're trying to teach them where their food comes from." I smiled. "Sure, come on back." I spent the next hour showing the Monroe family around my property. The kids were fascinated by everything: collecting eggs, feeding the chickens, petting the goats, and picking tomatoes from the garden. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about sustainable farming and told me she'd started composting at home. As they were leaving, the little girl, Emma, looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mr. Harding, are you going to keep your farm forever?" "That's the plan, sweetheart." "Good. I like having chickens near my house." After they left, I sat back on my porch and thought about everything that had happened. The stress, the harassment, the legal battles, the poisoned chickens, all of it had been worth it to stand my ground. This land meant something. It was a connection to my father, to the past, to a way of life that was increasingly rare in the sprawling Dallas suburbs. More than that, fighting back had set a precedent. The county had reaffirmed agricultural property rights. The courts had slapped down an HOA that overreached. And maybe, just maybe, other people facing similar situations would feel empowered to stand up for themselves. Robert called me in August with one final update. The State Bar of Texas is investigating Patricia Vollmer for her role in the case. Apparently, there's evidence she knowingly pursued frivolous claims and may have been aware of the harassment campaign. She could face disciplinary action. Good. She was just as bad as Brenda in some ways. Lawyers are supposed to zealously represent their clients, but there are limits. When you cross the line into helping your client harass and intimidate someone, you've violated ethical rules. The investigation into Patricia took months, but eventually, she received a formal reprimand from the state bar and had to take additional ethics training. It wasn't disbarment, but it was a black mark on her record. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm as fall approached. My farm produced a bumper crop of vegetables that year. I think all the stress made me channel my energy into the garden. I donated boxes of produce to the local food bank and sold the rest at a farmer's market in McKinney. Hank the rooster continued to crow every morning, a sound I'd always found comforting. Now it felt even better, knowing that nobody could tell me to silence him. He was just being a rooster, doing what roosters have done for thousands of years. I thought about getting a sign made for the entrance to my property. Something simple. Harding Family Farm ESD, 1983. A reminder that this place had history, had roots, had a purpose beyond someone's vision of a perfect suburban development. In October, right around the anniversary of the trial verdict, Tom Sullivan called me. "Zachary, the board wants to do something to make amends for what happened last year. We'd like to organize a community farm day here if you're willing. Let people see what a working farm actually looks like, do some education, maybe sell some of your produce. What do you think?" I considered it. A year ago, I would have said no way. But the neighborhood had changed, or at least the leadership had. And if it helped people understand why farms matter and why property rights matter, maybe it was worth doing. Okay, but on one condition. Any proceeds from selling my produce go to the local FFA chapter. I want to support the next generation of farmers. Deal. The Community Farm Day happened in early November. Over 200 people showed up, families from the subdivision, people from surrounding areas, even some members of the local media. I gave tours, answered questions, let kids collect eggs and feed animals, and talked about sustainable farming practices. The event raised $3,000 for the Future Farmers of America chapter at the local high school. More importantly, it showed people that farms and subdivisions could coexist peacefully when there was mutual respect. A reporter from the Dallas Morning News was there and asked me if I had any regrets about how I'd handled the situation. No regrets. I wish it hadn't been necessary, but I don't regret standing up for my rights. This farm is my livelihood and my heritage. Nobody gets to take that away because they don't like hearing a rooster crow. What would you say to other people dealing with HOA overreach? Document everything. Know your rights. Don't be afraid to get legal help. And most importantly, don't assume that just because someone has authority, they have the right to abuse that authority. HOAs serve a purpose, but they're not above the law. The article ran the following Sunday with the headline, "How One Farmer Stood Up to HOA Overreach and Won." It included photos of my farm, quotes from Tom Sullivan about the neighborhood's transformation, and a sidebar about property rights and agricultural zoning. I framed that article and hung it in my kitchen, right next to a photo of my father standing in front of the original chicken coop he'd built in 1983. As December rolled around and the year drew to a close, I took stock of where things stood. I'd spent roughly $30,000 in legal fees, though the settlement had more than covered that. I'd lost 3 chickens to poisoning and countless hours of sleep to stress and worry. But I'd won something more valuable, the right to live my life on my own terms on my own land. The subdivision had learned that you can't simply bulldoze over existing property rights and long-standing land use. The county had reaffirmed the importance of agricultural zoning and the protections it provides. And two people who'd thought they could harass and intimidate someone off their property had faced real consequences. Most importantly, my farm was still here, still operating, still productive. Hank still crowed at sunrise. The chickens still laid eggs. The vegetables still grew. Life went on as it should. On Christmas morning, I was having coffee on my porch when Tom Sullivan walked over with his family. His wife carried a basket covered with a cloth napkin. "Merry Christmas, Zachary. We brought you some homemade cinnamon rolls. You didn't have to do that." "We wanted to. You've been a good neighbor, even when we didn't deserve it." His two teenagers were with him, and the boy, probably about 16, looked at my farm with interest. "Mr. Harding, do you ever need help around here?" "I'm trying to save money for college, and I'd be interested in learning about farming." "Actually, I could use someone to help with the heavy work a few hours a week. You interested in getting dirty?" "Yes, sir." "Then come by next Saturday and we'll talk." After they left, I sat with my coffee and the cinnamon rolls and watched the sunrise over my land. It had been the hardest year of my life since my father died, but I'd come through it. The farm had survived. And maybe, just maybe, I'd helped set a precedent that would protect other people from the same kind of harassment. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Merry Christmas. Saw the morning news article made national news. You're famous." I texted back, "Just a farmer trying to live in peace." "You're more than that. You stood up to bullies and won. That matters." I thought about that as I finished my coffee. Maybe Robert was right. This hadn't just been about roosters and HOA fines. It had been about the fundamental right to use your property as you see fit, as long as you're not hurting anyone. It had been about standing up to people who think rules and power give them the right to control others. The sun was fully up now, bright and clear on a cold December morning. Hank crowed from the chicken coop, loud and proud. I smiled. Let him crow. This was his home, just like it was mine. And nobody was going to change that. Over the following months, I heard through Tom that Brenda had moved out of state. The stress of the legal consequences, the public embarrassment, and becoming a pariah in the neighborhood had been too much. Her house sold quickly, and she was gone. Susan Crawford stayed but kept a very low profile. I'd see her occasionally at the grocery store, and she'd avoid eye contact. I didn't hold grudges, but I also didn't go out of my way to make her feel comfortable. Actions have consequences. The teenager from Tom's family, his name was Marcus, turned out to be a hard worker and genuinely interested in farming. He came by every Saturday morning and learned everything from crop rotation to chicken husbandry. He told me he was thinking about studying agricultural science in college. "There's good money in sustainable farming," I told him one Saturday while we were repairing fence posts. "And it's work that matters. People will always need food. Plus you get to be your own boss." "That too. Though I'll warn you, it's not easy. The work is hard, the hours are long, and sometimes you have to fight just to keep doing what you're doing. But it's worth it." Marcus helped me expand the vegetable garden that spring. We added raised beds for tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. I also bought 4 more chickens and a second rooster, which I named Justice, since my hen by that name had turned out to be a prolific layer. The farmer's market became a regular Saturday afternoon routine. I'd pack up whatever was in season, load it in my truck, and spend a few hours selling produce and eggs. I met other farmers, swapped tips and stories, and felt connected to a community that understood the work. One Saturday in May, exactly 2 years after that first orange envelope appeared on my door, I was at the market when a woman approached my stand. She looked to be in her 30s, professional, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Harding, my name is Catherine Morrison. I'm a producer for a show on PBS about property rights and land use conflicts. Would you be interested in being featured in an episode?" I was skeptical. "What kind of episode?" "We're doing a series about eminent domain, zoning disputes, and HOA overreach." "Your case is exactly the kind of story we want to tell someone who stood up for their rights and won." "I don't know. I'm not really interested in being on TV. It would be a great opportunity to educate people about agricultural property rights, and it might help others facing similar situations." That angle got me. If sharing my story could help someone else stand up to an overreaching HOA, maybe it was worth the discomfort of being on camera. Let me think about it. I talked it over with Robert, who thought it was a good idea. You've got nothing to hide, and the message is important. Plus, it's PBS, they'll handle it professionally. I agreed to do it. The film crew came out in June and spent 2 days filming. They interviewed me walking around the farm, talking about the history of the property, explaining what had happened with the HOA, and discussing the legal battle. They also interviewed Robert, Tom Sullivan, and even David Martinez from County Code Enforcement. The episode aired in September as part of a series called The Fight for Home. It was well done, balanced, informative, and compelling. They contrasted my story with other cases of HOA overreach around the country, showing a pattern of organizations that had lost sight of their original purpose. After it aired, I got more emails and calls than I could count. People thanked me for standing up. Others shared their own horror stories. A few were facing similar situations and wanted advice. I did what I could to help, mostly by sharing what I'd learned. Document everything, know your rights, get legal help early, and don't back down just because the fight is hard. The following year brought more changes. The county, partially in response to my case and others like it, passed new regulations clarifying that HOAs could not claim jurisdiction over agricultural properties that predated the subdivision. It was a common-sense rule that should have existed all along, but sometimes it takes a high-profile case to get things changed. Marcus graduated high school and got accepted to Texas A&M to study agricultural economics. I wrote him a recommendation letter and gave him a standing job offer to work the farm during summer breaks. My relationship with the neighborhood stabilized into something genuinely positive. The community farm day became an annual event. People would stop by to buy eggs or vegetables. Kids would ask to pet the goats. It felt like what community was supposed to be: neighbors respecting each other's differences while finding common ground. On quiet mornings, I'd sit on my porch with coffee and listen to Hank Crow, watching the sun rise over fields my father had worked and I defended. The peace was hard-won, but it was real. 3 years after it all started, Tom Sullivan called me with unexpected news. "Zachary, the HOA board wants to give you an award." "An award? For what?" "For your contributions to the community." I know that sounds crazy given the history, but hear me out. Your stand against the previous board led to real reforms. The neighborhood is better now. People understand property rights better. We're a real community now instead of just a subdivision. The board wants to recognize that. I almost said no. The irony was too much, accepting an award from the organization that had tried to drive me off my land. But then I thought about it differently. This wasn't the same HOA. Different people, different values, different approach. Okay, but I'm not making a speech. Fair enough. The award ceremony was held at a neighborhood barbecue in June. Tom presented me with a plaque that read, "In recognition of Zachary Harding for teaching our community the true meaning of property rights and good neighbors." It was sincere and thoughtful, and I was genuinely touched. I kept my word about not making a speech, but I did say a few words. Thank you. I hope we've all learned that being neighbors means respecting each other, even when we're different. Maybe especially when we're different. People clapped, and several came up afterward to shake my hand and thank me. It was a good moment, a closing of one chapter and the opening of another. As the years rolled on, my farm became an established part of the landscape. The subdivision matured, trees grew larger, and turnover brought new families who'd never known the conflict. To them, having a working farm next door was just a normal part of life. I expanded my operation slightly, adding beehives for honey production and a small orchard. Marcus, true to his word, worked summers and learned the business inside and out. We talked about him potentially taking over the farm someday when I was ready to retire, keeping it in operation and preserving the agricultural heritage of the land. The whole experience changed how I viewed property ownership and community. I'd always taken for granted that owning land meant you could do what you wanted with it, within reason. The HOA battle taught me that those rights have to be defended, that there are always people who think their vision should override your rights, and that standing up for principle sometimes means fighting battles you never expected. It also taught me about the importance of good governance. HOAs aren't inherently bad. They serve legitimate purposes in managing common areas and maintaining property values. But when they are run by people who see them as instruments of control rather than service, they become toxic. The transformation of Meadowbrook Hills HOA from Brenda's fiefdom to Tom's collaborative organization showed what a difference leadership makes. Looking back, I'm grateful for how things turned out, even though I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone. I kept my farm, established important legal precedents, helped reform an HOA, educated the community about agriculture, and maybe inspired a few other people to stand up for their rights. My father would have been proud. He'd always believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard, in standing your ground when you knew you were right, and in treating land as a trust to be preserved for future generations. I'd honored all of those values, even if the path had been rougher than I expected. As I write this, it's been 5 years since that first orange envelope appeared on my door. Hank, the original Rooster, has passed on, replaced by Hank the second, who's just as loud and proud. The chickens still lay eggs. The vegetables still grow. The farm endures. And every morning when I hear that rooster crow at sunrise, I smile. Because that sound represents something more than just a bird greeting the day. It represents the right to live your life on your own terms, to use your property as you see fit, and to stand up to anyone who tries to take that away. The county was right all along. They built a subdivision next to a working farm, and that farm isn't going anywhere.